Let's do this. Ooh, perfect. Okay, so it should see, what do you see?
So you want to go to grad school?
Do you see that as, do you see the second slide or no?
No.
Perfect. Bart, don't make fun of graduate students. They just made horrible life choices. Okay, so if I can't talk you out of it, this is why grad school is hell. So I'm going to go over the conk for you. So there's a little test. Are you neurotic? Do you like your imagination being crushed? Do you like being a professor's slave? Your idea of a good time is using jargon, and you have a deep need to keep on avoiding life. Grad school is hell, I will say that. There's a lot of stressors. You are paid, but you're not paid a lot of money, and you often have to sign what is called a poverty agreement, which basically means you won't seek outside employment while you are working for the university. So you'll have to get by on about $2,000 a month. And you aren't allowed to make any more money because they want you focused on your research. Any questions about that part?
How was that being in UC Santa Cruz?
Oh, well, we went on strike for higher pay, which didn't work.
Yikes.
But we did get free healthcare, which was nice.
Sweet.
So your pay is a living site. It's a stipend that you use to pay rent and for food. And rent in Santa Cruz is very expensive.
Right. Well, you came out alive, so.
Yeah. So some of the things you need to decide on the kind of program you are interested in, what kind of degree you want. So I went over the PhD, master's, and PsyD, and figure out the process, and you'll figure out what you need. So here are the different types of programs there are in general. There are clinical programs. There are experimental programs, which is what I did. There's counseling psych, school psych, IO. Does anyone here know what IO is?
Industrial organization.
Yeah. So you're looking at how do you optimize a business is what it's all about. And there are many other different types. So, hey, leave it. Leave it. Leave it. Robisco, leave it. That's enough. That's enough. Robisco, come here. She's barking at the light. There we are. Maybe that'll help. I know, it doesn't help at all. Let's go. Hush. 1 second. Leave it. Okay, so master's. You really can't do that much of a master's in psychology. Hey, I'm doing something right now, honey. I'm doing something. Go to sleep. Okay, so master's programs don't really offer that much right out of the bat. So here is a good comparison of the income from a master's to a PhD. As you can see, there's quite a bit of a divergence going on there. So a PhD will just simply pay more than a master's will. So this is one of the really important graphs to know if you're going to think about beginning a PhD. It pays more to be unemployed than to get your PhD. So the average stipend is $18,000. The average maximum annual unemployment benefit is $21,000. Now, being a graduate student, you're not unemployed, so you're making less than you would if you were unemployed. Just saying. Oops. A PsyD, on the other hand, some important points to look at. You have to pay about $30,000 a year $4,000 a year for books, and another $2,000 for a laptop. Some of the basics of the process are you research and you select programs. Now, I'm explicitly not saying schools here for a reason. You're going to contact potential advisors who are going to sponsor you to get information about those programs. Now, what you need. For a master's, you need a 3.0. For a PhD, you need about a 3.5. I got in to my PhD program with a 3.3. So don't fret if you don't have the best GPA in the world. What really matters is research experience. So get into labs, do research, and engage, and use your brain and do some critical thinking. That'll look really good when you're applying to a PhD program. You also will need your official transcripts. And this is, I cannot emphasize enough, 3 strong letters of recommendation. One of the worst things you can do is get a okay letter of recommendation. So you want to ask the professor who you're going to ask for this letter, can you write me a strong letter? Don't just ask for a letter of rec. And then there's your personal statement. This is saying, why do you want to go to this program in particular? And you're going to want to make a personal statement for each individual school that is tailored towards the professor you want to work with. So what are the deadlines in general? They're normally between November 15th and January 15th of the year prior to when you would start. Okay, so this is the really expensive part. You want to apply to as many as possible. And they cost about $50 to $100 each. And you're also going to need money for the GREs. So it is expensive applying, but it is worth it. So your very own Todd Watson actually made this slide deck. And his tips are, be absolutely sure you want to go. Research experience is a requirement. You are applying to a boss and not a school. What this means is, don't think of it as like when you're applying to undergrad. You are applying to somebody who you want to work with, wherever they are. They could be anywhere in the country, and that's the person you're applying to. You aren't applying to the school for the name. For example, I have a good friend who's at the University of Mississippi, and she studies memory and technology. But you never really hear of the University of Mississippi as like a top tier school, but she's a top tier researcher. So it's about the person. So geographical constraints are not really realistic when it comes to applying to graduate school. Make yourself known. Send out cold emails to these professors who you want to work with so they know your name. And when they know your name, there's that familiarity bias, so they're more likely to like your application when they see it. And of course, have a plan B in case you don't get it anywhere. So that's my general tips for graduate school and getting in. Come on. There we go. Any questions about getting in or what that application process is actually like?
Did you use any on-campus Lewis and Clark resources to help you make the choices you did?
No, I did not. I used the professors themselves. I went to their office hours and I just talked to them and I asked you, okay, which schools do you recommend applying to for this field? And then I spent time just Googling professors, and I read through papers, looked up their names, looked up where they were working.
And what year did you start doing that? As like a freshman, sophomore?
I started doing that the year, I did that my junior year and sophomore year.
Joel, so you told me personally that working in the club was actually really, really helpful. Can you elaborate on your time inside club, starting it, working with
Yeah.
community?
I can. So I started the club. Well, actually, I had the idea. I realized there was no club my freshman year, and I wanted there to be a psych club. And Brian told me if I wanted to start a psych club, I had to find another person to found it with me who was younger in order to make sure that there'd always be a continuity for the club. And so I founded the club with Gemma Bomber. And we were followed up with two other members, Chris and Jackie Potter. Together we formed the club, and the idea was it would be it would have a structure of self-continuity built in, where one of the roles we created was the senior vice president, the junior vice president, whose role it was to always be a younger than the current president, who would take on the role of the president when the president graduated. And the absolute most important priority of the president was making sure that there was somebody to follow after them to make sure that the club would always exist. And what I learned founding the club was there's a lot of bureaucracy at Lewis and Clark. And so if you want a resource off it, you actually have to make that resource happen. And so founding events, going to all of the, is it SOB? No, or what's the SOB meetings to get funding is a nightmare. I also learned, and this is something you'll need to know in industry, how to do budgets where your budget evaporates at the end of the year. So knowing how to make sure you're getting every dime you can, because you're not going to get a dime again, and making sure you spend everything, because if you underspend, they're going to see that and like, oh, you saved money, you're good at that. We're going to give you less this year because you don't need all that money. Founding the club really helped also management skills. It also looked great on my resume and stuff. Being in the club also is useful because one of the most important things you're going to do in your college career is actually make the connections that'll last you a good lifetime. Because these are people who you're meeting are actually going to be able to be friends, be support, and help you get through a lot of things. And in the future, let's say you have you have compatible careers. You can do collaborations, and you already have that rapport built up that makes doing those collaborations a lot easier. I don't know if I'm answering your question too circuitously, but
Oh, that was great. The only other question I have about your experience in the club is that you worked with a very, very legendary psychologist that
yes.
we almost got a hold of but didn't quite. So I was wondering if you could tell that story because I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I did get Zimbardo my first year. I've been wanting to get him to give a talk at Lewis and Clark for quite some time, and so I worked with the Pamplin Society to get him to kind of talk. And so we made a donation of about $2,000 to his Heroic Imagination project for him to give a good talk at Lewis and Clark College, which was one of the most popular events we had that year for quite a while. We filled up the council chambers and the overflow room, which was not the Bone, but there's like a classroom area at the far end of Templeton upstairs.
I'm pretty sure it's Tamarack.
No, it's STAM.
STAM, that's right.
Yeah. We filled up STAM all the way, both sides, because you know how there's that divider in STAM. We filled up STAM all the way,
That's
including
awesome.
and council chamber. So that was a lot of fun, going emails back and forth, working with his personal assistant to try to schedule everything. It took a lot of time and effort to get to work. But it worked out. I donated some frequent flyer miles so we could fly him out first class, because that's one of his requirements. He's old, so he needs the extra leg room, and he's legendary enough that he deserves that kind of treatment.
True. Can you quickly touch upon who Philip Zimbardo is? Because some people watching
Yes. Okay, so Philip Zimbardo is a very famous psychological researcher. He conducted the Stanford Prison Experiment. This was an experiment that showed he and Craig Haney conducted an experiment that showed that people are bound to the power of the situation, and you could put random people into positions of power over other people, and they will often abuse that power. The experiment had to come to a halt because in his experiment he made them prisoners and wardens, or prison guards, and the prison guards began abusing the prisoners just because they were assigned that role. And so what he talked about was he regrets this. He wants to now study how people are good. Can he make people good by the power of the situation? Which I find to be a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And kind of do a reverse Milgram experiment.
Totally. Sweet. Does anyone else have any last questions about grad school?
Well, I
There's
just
no
have a
dumb question.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just want to know about like the different fields in psychology because I'm not really sure.
Yeah, okay. So you have so I'm going to go over it in multiple orders. So on level 1, you have cognitive, developmental, and social. Cognitive psychology is mostly about like creativity, memory, learning, thinking, problem solving, figuring out like vision and stuff like that. Hearing, that's more in the cognitive area. Social psychology is all about how an individual interacts with a group and how the group affects the individual. This is different than sociology, and that sociology is about how groups interact with groups. Social psychology is about the individual in the group. And then developmental psychology is about how aging changes your psychology and the way you think, and how growing older actually affects things. Then, if you go in a bit deeper, I can mostly speak on the cognitive side. You have a perception, which is normally going to be research about how you see things, visual illusions, auditory illusions, tactile illusions. You might also go into the idea of embodied cognition. How many of you heard that term before? Anyone else? Thumbs up? Okay. So embodied cognition is the idea that you're actually thinking with your body. And that in order to be able to think about something, you have to actually be able to experience it. That doesn't mean you've actually experienced it, but you have to actually be able to experience it. So, for example, if you don't have vision, it would be very hard to have the concept of what vision is. Or if you don't have legs, it might be the idea of standing your ground. That phrase might not have as much resonance to you because you are unable to visualize yourself standing. Unless you were able at some point. That's a really important part of it. This also goes into another area, which is another really cool area. How many of you heard of the facial feedback hypothesis?
Yep.
So what that one is that it's where you put it's like if you smile, you're going to feel happy. So if you're unable to smile, that means you're probably less likely to be able to feel happy. And there's some research into this where if you inject Botox, your mood goes down because it limits your ability to smile. So it's kind of going into this idea of the embodied cognition.
I've heard the inverse too, where some people are using Botox for depression as far as limiting the ability to frown.
Yeah. That's the same idea. Then there's also memory, which is what I do is I study like how do you remember things and what are the cognitive processes in that. There's learning, which is how do you actually learn new information and encode it. There's human-computer interactions, which is what I do often also, which is dealing with how do you interact with technology and how does technology interact with you and what are the consequences of that. But it gets broken down even more if you actually look at what professors are studying, because they often have a small subset of that and they're really interested into different questions. So for example, one of my professors is really interested in language and in particular spontaneous communication. What that means is how do you generate communications to start with? And they're also interested in the filler words like ums and uhs. And why do those go in and how do those affect how you communicate? There's other areas which are dealing with language use, and they study like how do you form the phonemes in your mouth and how do you think about them and when do they occur? When do those thoughts actually happen? There's other ones, which I really like, when our professors did on the tilted head. So does this affect your perception in any meaningful way? Why is it that you're able to recognize a face better when it's right side up than when it's upside down? But prosopagnosics are able to identify a face better when it's upside down than when it's right side up. So there's all these different areas of psychology. There's also areas of psychology, psychophysiology, which is using measures that are more physiological in nature.
Sweet.
So there's a lot of, sorry, Ruth, are you saying something?
Me?
Yeah, no, your thing is highlighted.
Oh. Well, not, I wasn't going to, but I was just like, for me, there are like certain areas that I feel like I would be really interested in studying, but
Like, what are
I
you
won't.
interested
I don't know if it's more like a fantasy or whatever, but I'm really interested in criminal psychology and like I just don't know if that's something that I genuinely would want to go into or not, because I won't get the opportunity to try and learning it unless yeah.
Actually, there is a professor, I believe he's still at Lewis and Clark, who teaches that.
Tom?
Yeah. So this, he sent an email to Tom.
Ruth, we had a great criminology symposium the other year. I'm still in touch with those people, so I would be happy to have them do a Zoom conference for everyone because they had a really, really, really great presentation on that.
Right. And we don't have a class for that, do we?
Well, there's abnormal psych, and they'll touch a lot about that, you know, because like a lot of what
I took that.
Okay.
Who'd you take it with?
Wilcox.
I love her. She's amazing. I had her for abnormal. I also had her for a few other things.
Yeah. I just like, for me, I'm really interested in like the very, I don't know if granular is the right word, but like the dynamics within an interrogation setting or like,
that will come up in
trials.
The event, the Zodiac Killer event. So John Rico is a detective and a criminologist, so he'll talk a lot about that. And you can ask him too if we do a Q&A.
Yeah. So there's different areas of, the area you're looking at is forensic psychology. There's a lot of different facets of it. There is the more cognitive facet, and there's also the social facet of it.
Well, the kind that I'm interested in is like, for me, the thing is, I don't see myself as being the person who would take the stand and like give that kind of psychological, like, I talk to the person and this is my opinion, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not what I'm interested in. I would be more interested in like I don't know, working with criminals or their families directly and being more like hands-on in that way versus just descriptive and
Yeah, I know that exists. That's again the same kind of thing.
okay.
You can find that there's a social people actually at UC Santa Cruz. There's Craig Haney who was Bill Zabardo's graduate student, who worked with prison reform and works with how do you make prisons better environments and actually rehabilitate people instead of just punish. He does some really cool research into that area. I suggest you look him up, and if you're interested in grad school, he might be a person to apply to if that's one of your interests in actually making a difference for people.
I guess it's just hard because I feel like there's so many parts of psychology that I'm really interested in. It's like, how do I narrow it down?
You don't have to. You can apply to a program and apply to different programs in different areas, and you go to the one you want to do, and that's the general area of research you're going to do, but you can bring in your own flair.
So
So basically, you're going to choose an area, and the area is set in stone, but the lens is not.
So Joel, are you saying if you get like a PhD in cognitive psychology, for example, you can be cross-disciplinary, right?
Absolutely. You can use different tools. If you want to include more social elements in your cognitive psychology degree, you can. And in fact, I recommend it.
Right. Because you, especially with human-computer interaction, you touch a lot upon computer science too. So it's kind of already like inherently like a cross-disciplinary field, right?
Yeah.
So on that topic, I would love it if you could talk a little bit more about the field that you're interested in. Because if I remember correctly, you're interested in UX, right? UX research.
I am interested a bit in UX. I see the countdown timer again. Makes sense. That's resets every 40 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in user experience. I'm also really interested in explainable artificial intelligence. And so what I'm really interested in is how do you design a system that is able to convey what is going on inside the black box of an artificial intelligent agent, such that the operator can make accurate judgments. And this involves a lot of cognitive psychology research, and I'm using the tools that I learned doing my research.
How did you?
I'm not, however, using all the content that I learned. I'm already using the tools.
How did you come to find out about these fields, and like what made you want to pursue them?
Yeah, this is how everything works in the world. I got a referral from another graduate student for this lab at the Palo Alto Research Center, and that got me into this job. And so that was how I became interested in this particular area of explainable AI.
Sweet.
So it helps befriending your colleagues.
No kidding. Awesome. So I think I did advertise this event as like touching upon UX a little bit more.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Can you just
I need more UX stuff. So I basically, one of the things I do with UX is it's like the interface. So a lot of the time I spend my day running our interface and actually saying, okay, is this actually doing what we say it's going to do? So I build up these maps and I display these maps to participants, and then I give them to a colleague of mine who actually runs a Mechanical Turk version of the experiment. And then I get the data back and I'm looking at it and I make a judgment about, okay, have we crossed a certain threshold that we need to cross in order to determine that this is working in the way we want it to work. And so a big thing of UX design is it's very iterative. You come up with a design, you display the design, you get feedback, you go back, you integrate the feedback, you show it again, you get new feedback, and it's forever iterative. I'm actually working with the team that developed the graphical user interface. So That's a bit of the legacy of the team that I'm working with, is doing the same kind of project. So it's a really well-established method. Other parts of UX you might find are dealing with understanding how people interact with advertisements, how people interact with interfaces, where it's about like mouse clicks. So you're not really using the content that you learn in psychology, but you're learning methods. You're learning when do you use a t-test? When do you use an ANOVA? When do you do A/B tests? What are the values of quantitative psychology versus qualitative psychology? Do you all know the difference between the two?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So with those two different types of psychology, you need to know when do you use one or when do you use the other. And so one of the values of the PhD programs, and this is what these companies are looking for, is knowing how to use research experience and how to design studies to be beneficial for their projects. I'm also running other studies, which I can't actually talk about because of NDAs. But basically, they involve me going to different places and hooking them up to mechanical prototypes and seeing do these prototypes actually do the effect that we want them to do. And so I hook them up and I see, okay, are they learning something with this technology?